Dear listeners, imagine this for a moment. A little girl stands trembling in front of her own home, her clothes soaked, her eyes swollen, her breath shallow under the cold and merciless rain. Behind the door that was just slammed shut, a woman's furious voice screams at her, casting her out like an unwanted animal. There is no place to return to, no hand to hold. She walks alone with no idea where to go. And without realizing it, her footsteps lead her to the most dangerous place no one ever dares to enter, the forbidden forest. But within the darkness of that cursed forest, her fate changes forever. Before we continue, please support this channel by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Your support means so much to us and keeps us excited to bring you more powerful stories. Oh, and don't forget to check in down in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from so we can see how far these stories have reached. Now let's begin the story. The morning air was still cold when Lena, a 7-year-old girl, was thrown out of her home by her stepmother. There was no warning, no real reason, just loud shouting, anger, and a door slammed in her face. "You are not my child. Get out. Never come back." The scream of Madame Rattray echoed down the narrow village road, shattering what should have been a quiet morning. Lena stood frozen at the doorstep. Her tiny body, thin and frail, was covered only by an old piece of cloth. In her little hands, she held a bundle of clothes, tossed at her like trash by the woman who never loved her. No one came to defend her. No neighbors stepped in. Her father had died 1 year earlier. Since then, Lena had become nothing more than a shadow inside her own home. Every day she was made to clean, fetch water from the farthest well, and serve in silence. Meanwhile, Madame Rattray sat in comfort, living off a life she had stolen. Lena didn't cry. Her tears had run dry long ago. She looked down the dirt road in front of her and began to walk, one foot in front of the other. She did not know where she was going. She did not care. All she knew was that there was no longer any place for her to return to. She passed shuttered windows. She walked past empty fields and into overgrown paths where no one ever bothered to go. The sun slowly climbed the sky, but Lena paid no attention. Her small steps led her farther and farther away, until she stood before a massive tree at the edge of the village. Beyond that tree was a place the villagers never entered. They called it the Forbidden Forest. A forest filled with stories, of beasts, curses, and children who vanished without a trace. Lena paused. She could feel it in the air. The air was heavier. The silence was deeper. But she did not turn back. There was nothing to return to. With a tired breath and a weak body, Lena stepped into the trees. Her steps grew more clumsy. Thorns scratched her legs. Roots tripped her. She fell again and again but kept going. It was as if her heart had been covered by a fog. In her head, only one voice kept echoing. "You are not my child. You are not my child." Eventually, her little body collapsed beneath the roots of a giant tree. Her breath grew shallow. Her belly hurt with hunger. And slowly her eyes closed. Darkness, silence. But the forest was not empty. Something moved beyond the branches. Leaves rustled. The wind stopped. Even the birds went quiet. From behind the trees stepped a massive figure, nearly 3 meters tall. His body was covered in thick silver fur. His eyes glowed with a warm golden light, filled with sorrow and mystery. He was the creature only spoken of in whispers, a giant ape named Bramo. Bramo stepped forward slowly. His movements were heavy yet gentle. He knelt beside the small girl lying unconscious in the dirt. His nose caught the scent of bruises and despair, but there was no fear, only sadness. With his strong, massive arms, Brahmo lifted Lena carefully, as if she were a fragile leaf. And with slow, steady steps, he carried her deeper into the forest, to a place no human had ever seen. When Lena opened her eyes, she was no longer cold. She was inside a warm cave, held in a cradle of dried leaves and moss. A soft light poured through the hanging roots above. Next to her were fresh fruits and a hollow bamboo filled with water. She turned her head. There, sitting quietly with his back to her, was Brahmo, eyes closed, silent, like a guardian. Lena's breath caught in her throat. But she did not scream. She did not run. Her voice was weak and broken. "Are you going to eat me?" Brahmo turned slowly. He shook his head. Lena looked down. "I don't have anywhere else to go. Can I stay here?" Brahmo nodded. And from that moment on, something began to change. Day by day, Brahmo cared for her. He showed her where the sweetest fruits grew. He carried her across rivers. He watched over her when the night was cold and her dreams were filled with tears. At first she called him nothing. But over time, her heart softened. Her lips whispered a name. "Papa Brahmo." He never replied. But his eyes said everything she needed to hear. In the heart of the forbidden forest, where no love was ever meant to exist, something beautiful had begun to grow. Yet far away, the world had not forgotten her. And without knowing it, danger was already on its way. The days passed without numbers. In the depths of the forbidden forest, time did not move like it did in the village. Here, the sun filtered through thick canopies in quiet patterns, and the wind carried the voices of birds, leaves, and things no one had ever named. Lena no longer counted her days with the rising and falling of the sun. She marked them by the sound of Brahmo's footsteps returning to the cave, or by the color of the fruits he brought her. She no longer cried at night. Her sobs had been replaced by the sound of forest creatures, crickets, frogs, the rustling of bats overhead. She had learned to listen to these things instead of her own loneliness. Inside the shelter Brahmo had made, formed beneath the twisted roots of an enormous tree, Lena began to discover peace. There was no bed, only soft leaves. No walls, only branches. But here, for the first time in her life, no one shouted at her. No one hit her. No one called her a burden. Brahmo never spoke. Not in words. But he spoke in actions. He would sit beside her when she woke up crying. He would offer her the ripest fruit, the largest mango, the sweetest guava. He once carried her on his shoulder for hours through the rain, keeping her completely dry beneath his thick silver fur. Sometimes she would talk to him even when he was quiet. And even though he never answered, she began to believe he understood every word. "Do you think my papa would have wanted me to be here?" Brahmo turned his head, as if remembering something distant, unreachable. "I don't remember his voice anymore," Lena whispered. "But yours. I think I'll remember it, even if you never say anything." Brahmo lowered his eyes and pulled her closer. To anyone else he might have looked terrifying, a monster made of shadows and muscle. But to her, he was warmth. Lena was not the same girl who had wandered into the forest. She was no longer just the abandoned child. Now she could climb trees with her bare feet. She could leap across streams. She could smell when it would rain. She could mimic the call of a forest bird and make it answer back. Brahmo taught her these things. He never pushed, never scolded. He simply showed her and waited, and she followed. One morning she woke to find him gone. She waited, curled in her nest of dry leaves, but the cave was quiet. Then she stepped outside and saw footprints. Not human but Brahmo's. He had gone north, where the trees grew tighter together and the fog never lifted. She followed. It was the first time she had left the shelter on her own. With a stick in one hand and determination in her eyes, she walked where he had gone, the earth cool beneath her bare feet. For hours she followed the trail, careful not to trip, careful not to speak. Finally she saw him. He was crouched by a stream, holding something. It was a baby deer, its leg wounded, bleeding, stuck in a patch of thorns. Bramo gently pulled the thorns away with his thick fingers, then dipped a cloth of moss into the cold water and pressed it to the wound. Lena froze. She watched the way his massive hands moved so softly, as if the deer were made of glass. She saw how his eyes looked, worried, focused, and for the first time she realized something. Bramo was more than just kind. He was once hurt. She could see it in the way he moved, the way he protected even a deer, as if long ago someone had failed to protect him. Lena stepped forward. Without a word, she helped him hold the moss. Together, they worked in silence until the deer could stand again. Then they watched it limp back into the trees. Afterward, Bramo didn't return to the cave right away. He led Lena to a place she had never seen before. A clearing, hidden behind a curtain of thick vines. There, in the middle of the clearing, stood a massive stone, covered in carvings. Animals, trees, a small figure standing beside a larger one. Child and a beast. "This was your home, wasn't it?" Lena asked. Bramo said nothing. But the way he sat beside the stone, the way he touched it gently, as if it were part of him. That was answer enough. Lena sat beside him. For hours, neither of them spoke. They just breathed the same air, as wind danced between the trees above them. As more weeks passed, Lena began to have dreams. Strange dreams. In one, she stood in the forest, alone. Bramo was nowhere to be found. The trees whispered her name, and the ground felt like it was pulling her down. In another, she saw her stepmother's face in the flames of a torch, calling her name not with anger, but with fear. Then came the third dream. She saw men. Men with axes. Dogs with sharp teeth. They were shouting. Not at her, but at something behind her. Bramo. She woke with a gasp, sweat covering her neck. She turned toward where Bramo usually sat, but he wasn't there. Her heart pounded. She ran outside barefoot and breathless. He wasn't near the stream. Not at the fruit grove. Not under the fig tree where they sometimes sat together. Panic rose in her throat. What if the dream was true? What if they had come? But before the fear could take hold completely, a shadow passed above her. She looked up. There he was. Bramo, descending from the upper branches of a tall tree, carrying a bundle of honeycomb and a wide grin in his eyes. Relief made her knees weak. She laughed, nearly cried, and ran into his arms. "You scared me," she whispered. Bramo gently wrapped one arm around her. He didn't speak. He never did. But in that moment, she heard the only voice that mattered. His silence. That evening, as they shared the honey under the stars, Lena looked up at the sky. "Do you think people like me can belong to a place like this?" Bramo looked at her. Then he pointed to his chest. Then to hers. Then to the forest. Lena smiled. He was telling her what she already knew. This place was her home now. But neither of them could see the distant eyes watching from beyond the trees. Not yet. Not tonight. Soon. The wind carried news through the forest. And danger was already on its way. It began with a footprint. At the edge of the northern river, where the villagers sometimes hunted wild pigs and deer, a young man named Gatra found something unusual. He crouched beside the thick mud and stared in silence. The shape was like no animal he knew. Too wide for a bear, too long for a man. The impression was deep, as if pressed by something massive, heavier than anything that should walk this part of the forest. He called for the others. They came with torches and knives, thinking perhaps it was a new predator that needed tracking. But when they followed the trail, it disappeared beyond a line of trees the villagers called the Whispering Border, the invisible line none dared cross, except for one old man. Elder Carta, the oldest in the village, stood silently behind the group. His eyes narrow. "I've seen that shape before," he muttered. The others turned to him. "It's just a legend," one said quickly. "No one believes that monster story anymore." Elder Carta's eyes sharpened. "Stories are remembered for a reason." He said nothing more. But in the silence that followed, something changed. Fear mixed with curiosity. And curiosity became obsession. The next day they returned. But this time they brought more men. Snares, bugs, and fire. They did not speak of saving anything. They spoke of capturing. They spoke of killing. Lena woke to the smell of smoke. Not fire, but the soft scent of ash riding the breeze. It was early morning, and the forest still slept. Bramo had not yet returned from gathering fruit, and Lena sat outside the cave with a half-eaten mango in her hand. The wind brushed her cheek gently like a warning. She looked toward the trees, her chest tightening. Something was different. The birds were not singing. The squirrels had vanished. The air had changed. By midday, Bramo returned. Lena ran to him, but stopped when she saw his face. He wasn't carrying anything. His shoulders were tight. His breathing heavy. He crouched and touched her cheek. Then he pointed to the sky, to the smoke, then to the north, then to the ground. She understood. Someone had entered the forest. Humans. Lena's heart pounded. "They're looking for you." Bramo didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. But the sadness in his eyes. It was the same sadness she had seen that day he treated the injured deer. That memory of something long ago. Of pain that had never fully healed. She reached for his hand. "Let's hide." But Bramo did not move. That night, neither of them slept. The next few days passed like shadows. Lena and Bramo moved from one shelter to another. Sometimes sleeping in the high branches, other times under waterfalls or in the hollowed trunks of old trees. The forest, once full of joy, had become tense, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. From a distance, they could hear the bark of dogs, the chopping of axes, men shouting to one another. Lena had never felt hunted before. Now she did. Every step, every breath, she feared they would be seen. Once, while crossing a shallow stream, they heard footsteps behind them. Bramo grabbed Lena and pressed her gently into the mud, covering them both in silence. She could see the boots of a man just a few feet away. He was muttering. Still no sign. "But I swear I saw movement." Then he spat and turned around. Bramo didn't move until even the sound of birds returned. Lena's breath shook. Her hands trembled. But Bramo wiped the mud from her cheeks with the gentlest touch. She tried to smile. He looked at her, and for a brief second, something passed between them. Fear. Not just for themselves, but for each other. By the fourth day, they reached the sacred clearing, the place with the stone covered in carvings. Lena knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the worn shapes. The image of the child beside the ape. She had always wondered who carved it. But now she didn't care. This place felt like the only place left untouched by fear. Bramo sat beside her, eyes closed. Then he stood and began carving something new into the stone. Lena watched in silence. He carved slowly, carefully, and when she looked again she saw it, her face beside his. Tears welled in her eyes. "You're not afraid of them, are you?" she whispered. Bramo didn't answer, but he stepped behind her and placed one massive hand on her shoulder. She closed her eyes. "I wish they knew you the way I do." Bramo stepped back, and Lena felt her heart pull as if it knew something she didn't. That night the wind changed again. The smoke was stronger, closer, and then the howling. Ugh, loud, angry, coming fast. Lena and Bramo ran. Through vines, cross fallen trees, past the sleeping birds. Bramo carried her when she stumbled. His breath heavy, chest rising with exhaustion. They reached a cliff's edge, where the forest opened into mist and stone. Nowhere to run. They turned, and there they were. Torches, dozens of them. Men with weapons. Dogs foaming at the mouth. And at the front stood Elder Carta. But his face was not cruel. His eyes were full of confusion, of something deeper. Lena stepped forward before Bramo could stop her. "Stop!" she screamed. "Please don't hurt him." The men shouted in return. The dogs barked louder. Elder Carta raised a hand. The crowd went quiet. "That voice," he whispered. "That child." He took one step forward. "Who are you?" Lena's voice shook. "My name is Lena. This is Bramo. He's not a monster. He's my family." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "She's alive. That's the girl who went missing." Elder Carta looked at Bramo, long and hard. "I have seen you before. Or someone like you. Many years ago." Bramo didn't flinch. "He saved my grandfather's life," Carta said slowly. "That's what I was told. That the beast in the forest once carried him out of a fire." No one spoke. Lena stood between Bramo and the crowd. Tears streamed down her face. "You came to destroy something you never tried to understand." Bramo stepped beside her. Unmoving, unbroken. And for a moment the line between human and creature vanished. But peace is not made in silence. Some of the hunters tightened their grip on their spears. Dog broke loose. It charged toward Bramo. Lena screamed. And Bramo moved. With one arm he lifted her out of the way. With the other, he caught the dog mid-air and gently pinned it to the ground without harm. The dog whimpered and backed away. The hunters raised their weapons. But Carta stepped forward. "No more blood." He turned to his people. "If this child lives in peace with him, what right do we have to call ourselves better?" Some dropped their weapons. Others hesitated. Lena stood there, in front of the creature who had saved her life, raised her, protected her. And for the first time the men lowered their eyes. Some out of guilt, some out of shame. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Lena knew the forest would never be the same again. And what came next would decide everything. Long after the torches vanished and the crowd returned to the village, Lena sat alone by the sacred stone. Bramo was not far. He never was. But that night, he kept his distance, watching her from behind the roots of an ancient fig tree. The fireflies hovered low around them, glowing dimly like forgotten memories. And the wind carried the faintest sound of footsteps that were no longer there. Lena held a dried leaf in her hand and crumpled it softly between her fingers. Everything had changed. The forest was not silent anymore. Not in the way it used to be. Its silence now carried echoes of men's voices, of doubt, of fear, of suspicion. And Lena knew, deep down, that this peace they found today was not strong enough to last forever. The next morning, Bramo returned to the clearing with a wounded bird in his hand. A small kingfisher, blue-feathered, trembling. Lena gasped when she saw it, then helped him wrap it in soft moss. They sat together, the bird between them, and watched as it slowly began to breathe more steadily. "Is that what you used to do?" Lena asked quietly. "Before you found me?" Bramo looked at her with gentle eyes. "You cared for the broken things." He didn't nod. He didn't speak. But she understood. And it made her wonder. How many others had he helped? How many had run from him instead of listening? How many had raised a weapon without ever learning his name? The kingfisher blinked once, then nestled into the moss as if it finally believed it was safe. Bramo stood and motioned for Lena to follow. They walked for a long time, farther than they'd ever gone before. Through thick ferns under fallen trees, past streams she had never seen, until they reached a new place. Quiet. Still. The air here felt older, heavier. And there, nestled between the roots of the tallest tree she had ever seen, stood a carved wooden door. Weathered, covered in moss, but unmistakably a door. Lena stepped closer, heart thudding. "Is this your home?" Bramo opened it with both hands, and the scent of damp earth and old memories washed over them. Inside it was dark, but not frightening. The room, if it could be called that, was made of carved stone and smooth roots. Along the walls were symbols, drawings, old things. Lena's eyes stopped on one painting, faded but still clear. Child and a creature, standing beside each other, just like the carving on the stone. She turned to Bramo, her voice barely a whisper. "Was that you?" He didn't move. But the way his shoulders tensed said everything. "You helped someone. A long time ago. A child." Bramo sat slowly, his hand reaching up to touch the drawing. Lena stepped closer. "You lost them, didn't you?" He didn't cry. But something in his breath changed. Sound. Like a quiet tremble held back for too long. She placed her hand over his. "I'm not going anywhere." 4 days, they remained near the old shelter. Bramo no longer left to hunt as far. Lena no longer roamed as freely. The forest felt like it was holding back, as if nature itself was waiting for something to shift. And it did. Began with small things. Strangers entering the woods. Not hunters. Men in coats. They did not carry spears but notebooks. Devices. Shiny tools that blinked in the dark. They spoke in words Lena didn't understand. They placed strange metal things on trees. They gathered samples from the river. They did not yell. They did not chase. But their presence felt even more dangerous. 'Cause they were not afraid. And those who are not afraid, Lena had learned, are often the most dangerous of all. Late one afternoon, Lena followed one of them from a distance. She kept low as Bramo had taught her. She stepped where the leaves wouldn't crack. She held her breath when the man stopped. He knelt beside a patch of grass, scribbled something in his book, then walked toward a tall tree where something beeped. Lena watched. Then she stepped on a twig. Snap. The man turned. He was sharp, focused. He did not shout. He smiled. "Well, what do we have here?" Lena didn't move. "You're the girl, aren't you? The one they said disappeared." His voice was gentle, but his smile was not. "They say you live with something." He stepped closer. She stepped back. "Don't worry," he said. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want to understand." But Lena had seen that kind of voice before. From men who smiled but never listened. She turned and ran. Through branches. Over roots. She heard him call out, but she didn't stop. When she reached Bramo, she was breathless. "They found us," she gasped. "Not the villagers. Someone worse." Bramo looked past her. his expression unreadable. Then he stood. And for the first time, he looked like the beast the stories warned about. Not because of anger, but because of resolve. He was going to protect her, no matter what. That night Lena couldn't sleep. She lay beside the stone again, her fingers tracing the familiar lines. She thought of the world outside the forest, of rooms with walls, of streets, of faces that never knew hers. And then she thought of Bramo, the warmth of his arms, the way he carried her when she was too tired to walk, the way he listened even when she made no sense. And she knew. He was more her family than anyone had ever been. Even if the world came crashing through the trees, even if no one ever understood, she would stay with him until the end. But something told her the end was coming faster than she could bear. The next day the strange men returned, but this time they brought cages, and not for animals, for something much, much larger. Morning light fell through the leaves like broken glass. There was no birdsong. Even the wind was quiet. Lena crouched behind a thick fern, eyes wide as she stared into the heart of the forest where she and Bramo had once picked fruit together. It had always been a place of laughter, of little joys, of calm. But now it was filled with metal. Cages, stacked in the middle of the clearing. Nets were rolled on the ground like snakes made of ropes and hooks. Strange machines blinked with red lights. Men stood beside them, wearing dark clothes, their faces hidden behind plastic shields. She couldn't hear them, but she could read their movements. They were preparing for something. She crept back to where Bramo was waiting behind the fallen trunk of an old tree. He had not spoken, not even with his hands, since she first saw the cages. His eyes were fixed on the direction of the clearing, but his mind seemed far away. He sat perfectly still. Too still. "Bramo," Lena whispered, crawling to his side. "They came back. They're not just exploring. They're hunting." He didn't blink. "They know where we are now. They've set traps. We have to go." Still no answer. She reached for his hand. It was warm, solid, but it didn't move. Lena lowered her head against his shoulder. "Please, don't leave me alone." That was when he finally turned. He looked into her eyes. And slowly, with a heavy breath, he nodded. They would not run, but they would move. That night they climbed higher into the mountain trees. Bramo moved without sound, carrying Lena across dangerous ledges and steep paths that no human had ever dared to walk. From the highest cliff, Lena could see the village far beyond the trees, tiny roofs and glowing orange fires. She could even hear the echo of a bell. And just below, deep in the forest, she saw the clearing again. But this time it was not empty. A new figure had arrived. Someone taller than the others. He moved with authority. The others obeyed him. Lena watched as he pointed to the machines and barked commands. Then she saw it. A large cage, open, waiting. At the center of it was a piece of fruit. "Trick." Bramo followed her gaze. She felt him tense beside her. "They know you're real now," she whispered. "And they're going to prove it." Bramo turned away. But not before she saw it in his eyes. Not fear. Shame. The next morning they returned to the old wooden shelter beneath the giant tree. The place with the drawing of the child and the creature. Lena sat in front of it while Bramo began carving something new. She watched his hands, strong but slow. "What are you doing?" she asked. He didn't stop carving. But eventually, he turned the stone toward her. And there it was. A figure with long hair. Standing in front of a cage. Hands raised. Defiant. Lena touched the carving. "You think it's going to happen?" He didn't answer. She stepped back. "I won't let them take you." That afternoon, A voice echoed through the trees. Not a shout. Not a call. Broadcast. Attention. If you can hear this. We are not here to harm you. We want to learn. We want to understand. The voice was cold. Rehearsed. Big. Lena's body stiffened. They're trying to sound kind, she muttered. But they came with chains. She looked at Bramo. He stared out into the distance. And then, without warning, he stood. He walked to the center of the forest, past the familiar trees, across the soft moss, until he reached the stream where he first found her. He knelt and waited. Lena ran to him. "What are you doing?" He looked at her, then placed a hand over her heart, and slowly shook his head. "No," she whispered. "You're not giving yourself up." He held her face gently, then touched the scars on her arms, faint lines that remained from the beatings she once endured under her stepmother's hands. And she understood. He was doing what no one had ever done for her. He was choosing to be her shield. That night Lena could not sleep. She lay on the damp earth, staring at the roots above her head, listening to the strange hum of machines far in the distance. She dreamed of chains, of hands reaching through the trees, of Bramo behind iron bars. She woke up screaming. Bramo was already there, holding her, not as a beast, but as a father. 3 days passed. Lena tried everything. She asked Bramo to run. She begged him to hide. She even tried building traps of her own using vines and rocks. But he never left the forest's heart. He stayed by the sacred stone, as if waiting for the storm. On the 4th morning they came. Not with screams, not with chaos, but in a straight line, calm and quiet. They approached the sacred clearing with nets in hand, moving slowly, carefully. Lena heard them long before she saw them. She grabbed Bramo's hand. "We have to go. Now." But Bramo only stepped forward. One step, then another, into the light. The leader, tall, cold eyes, raised his hand. The others surrounded them. Lena stood in front of Bramo. "If you take him, you take me." The leader tilted his head. "He is not human. And neither are you," she snapped. A murmur ran through the group. The leader stepped forward, lowering his voice. "We don't want to hurt anyone." "Then why the cages?" "For safety." "No," Lena said. "For control." Bramo placed a hand on her shoulder and slowly stepped beside her. The two of them together faced the men. And for a single moment, everything stopped. No birds, no wind, just breath. Then one of the men panicked. A dart gun rose. Lena screamed. And Bramo moved. Not to run, not to fight, but to shield her. The dart struck his shoulder. He fell. Lena rushed to him, holding his face. "No. Well, please stay. Please." The men surrounded them. The leader raised his hand. "Stand down." "I said no fire." "But he." "I said no." It was too late. Bramo's breath slowed, but his eyes stayed open, looking at Lena, telling her he was not afraid. They placed him in the cage. Lena followed, never leaving his side. And as the truck rolled out of the forest, she looked back at the place that had been her home, her world, her healing. And she whispered, "I will not let the world forget you." The city lights were colder than the forest moon. Tall buildings stabbed the sky. Horns blared like strange birds. The air smelled of burning metal, not wet earth. And Lena stood alone, her feet bare, her clothes too thin for the wind that blew between the machines they called cars. She had never seen so many people, never heard so many voices that did not speak to her. No one looked her in the eye. They brushed past her, some bumping her shoulder, others whispering things under their breath as they stared at the dirt on her legs or the wildness in her tangled hair. But Lena didn't notice any of that. Not really. Because her eyes were fixed on one thing. Banner. Hung above a white building with steel gates. Exotic species exhibition. Grand opening. 1 week only. Below it, a photograph. For a massive silhouette. Cage. Bramo. Her breath caught in her throat. She pushed forward through the crowd. The gates were too high for her to climb. The front entrance was guarded. She circled the building twice before finding a narrow alley between two dumpsters. Rats squeaked at her feet, and the sour smell of trash burned her nose, but she didn't stop. She slipped through a broken fence, scaled a stack of crates, and dropped silently into the back lot. Beyond the glass wall, he was there. Bramo. He didn't move. He sat in the center of the enclosure, surrounded by concrete, glass, and the stares of people pressing their hands against the walls. They pointed, laughed, whispered, "Is it real? Look at the size of that thing. Is it dangerous?" Lena's hands clenched into fists. They had no idea what he had done, what he had saved. How many nights he held her when the cold would not let her sleep. How many times he had chosen gentleness over rage. How often he had hidden, not because he was afraid, but because he did not want to be feared. And now they had made him a display. A prisoner in the middle of glass. She crawled through a gap near the ventilation duct and climbed down into the staff corridor. No one saw her. She moved like a shadow, just as he had taught her. Every step careful. Every breath silent. She reached the cage from behind, pressing her hand against the cold panel. Bramo! He did not turn. But she saw his chest rise. He was alive. Still breathing. But barely. His eyes looked forward, unseeing. As if he had given up on the world outside the trees. "I'm here," she whispered. "I found you." She didn't expect him to respond. But slowly his head turned. And for the first time in what felt like years, their eyes met. Tears filled hers instantly. "I'm going to get you out." The next days passed in a blur. Lena found shelter beneath a bridge near the edge of the city. She scavenged food from dumpsters, shared crusts of bread with pigeons, and used scraps of newspaper to keep warm at night. But every day she returned to the building, watching, learning. She memorized the guards' patterns, noted where the cameras pointed. She discovered a cleaner's back entrance that was sometimes left unlocked after lunch. And then she met him, a boy named Dino. He caught her stealing from a trash bin behind his uncle's food stall. Instead of shouting, he offered her a cup of soup. She didn't trust him at first. But he didn't ask questions. Only said, "You look like you're fighting something big." "I am," she said. He waited. And finally she told him everything. Not all at once. But enough. Enough for him to believe. Enough for him to want to help. On the 7th night since arriving in the city, they put the plan in motion. Dino had a cousin who worked in the building's maintenance team. He borrowed a uniform. At midnight, Lena wore it over her forest clothes. Her hair was tucked beneath a cap. Her eyes were focused. She entered through the service door with a mop in one hand and a heart pounding like thunder. No one stopped her. She made her way to the cage. The glass shimmered under the soft lights. Inside, Bramo stirred. "Tonight," she whispered. "I'm getting you out." In the back room she found the lock panel. Keycard access. She didn't have one. But Dino had stolen a janitor's badge 2 days ago. Lena swiped it. Red. She tried again. Red. Again. Green. The door clicked. She slipped inside. Bramo didn't move, even as the alarm light blinked above them. "We have to move," she said, reaching for his hand. He was weak, too weak. His body had shrunk, his muscles thinner. They had not fed him properly. She shook him gently. "You have to try. Please, Bramo." He groaned low, a sound that made her chest tighten. Still he pulled himself up inch by inch until he stood, taller than any man but barely strong enough to walk. She placed his arm over her shoulder and guided him to the service hallway. They moved slowly, every step like dragging a mountain. Behind them, the alarm began to beep louder. Someone had noticed. They reached the emergency exit. Lena slammed the bar. The door burst open into the alley. A voice shouted behind them, "Stop!" But they didn't stop. They ran. Or rather stumbled. Through streets, downstairs, into tunnels, until at last, they vanished. Into the dark. The city woke to chaos. Newspapers screamed. Rare creature stolen in the night. Security footage was blurry. No one saw the girl's face. But some claimed they saw something else. Shadow. Moving with her. Almost like a guardian. The search began. But Lena was long gone. Because she had one place left to go. One place they could never follow. Back to the forest. Back to where the wind still knew their names. The wheels of the stolen delivery truck spun deep into the night. Its headlights flickered like dying fireflies, and every bump in the road made Lena clench the steering wheel tighter. She had never driven before. Dino had shown her quickly. Brakes here, gas there, keep it straight. She barely understood any of it. But she had no choice. Bramo lay in the back, wrapped in old canvas tarps and plastic sheets, hidden from view. His breathing was slow, his body too large to fit properly, limbs curled against metal walls. Each time the truck hit a pothole, she heard him groan. Each sound pierced her chest like a blade. "Just a little longer," she muttered under her breath, eyes fixed on the broken road ahead. "We're almost home." The city lights disappeared behind her, and for the first time in days she saw stars. They stopped by a river at dawn. Lena dragged the back door open and climbed in. The air was cold, but Bramo's body radiated heat. He looked up at her with glassy eyes, weak but still alive. "I found water," she whispered, holding a tin cup to his lips. He drank, slowly, bit by bit. She touched his face. "We're not far now. Another day. 2 maybe." He blinked once. She curled beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. The engine ticked softly in the silence. And they slept. Together. They drove only at night now. By day, they hid the truck beneath thick trees or abandoned shacks. Once, Lena painted over the license plate with mud. Another time, she used branches to hide the vehicle entirely. But fear was always with her. Every siren in the distance made her duck. Every airplane overhead made her wonder if they were being watched. But Bramo never complained. He was healing. Slowly. She fed him with her own hands. Bananas, dried fruit, stolen bread. He accepted it all with quiet eyes. And every night, his strength returned just a little more. He began to sit up, then to stretch, then one night to walk again. Just barely. But it was enough. Enough to keep going. On the 7th night of travel, they reached the old road Lena had once walked as a child. The same road that had led her into the forbidden forest. The same one she had followed with no destination, only pain in her chest and a hole in her heart. Now she walked it again. But not alone. This time she led Bramo. This time she had someone to protect. The forest greeted them not with sound, but with stillness. The trees, tall and ancient, did not move. The ground was wet from recent rain. Lena stepped through the thorns, guiding Bramo with her hand. His fur brushed against branches, and the animals, those who remembered, watched from the shadows with wide, cautious eyes. By the time they reached the sacred stone, it was almost morning. Lena dropped to her knees and wept. She pressed her forehead to the carved surface, the figures of herself and Bramo still etched there. "You're home," she whispered. "We made it." Bramo touched the stone as well, his hand trembling. He sat beside her, staring at the moss, the sky, the earth that had once embraced him. But something was wrong. Different. The wind was restless. The birds had not returned. The forest, though untouched, felt watched. 2 nights later, Lena discovered why. She was foraging near the river when she heard a strange metallic clicking beneath the water surface. She knelt and pulled out something unnatural. Thin wires, sharp edges, tiny lights. Tracker. She turned it in her fingers, heart freezing. Then she looked up. To the trees above her. One had been cut recently. Cleanly. Besa. She ran back to the clearing. "Bramo!" she shouted, stumbling through roots and vines. "We weren't careful enough, they followed us." He was already standing. Eyes alert. The wildness back in his chest. That night, they moved deeper into the forest. To the oldest part. A place no map had ever drawn. Lena barely remembered it from her early days with Bramo. A steep valley filled with fog, where the trees whispered so softly it felt like dreams. They made camp there, high in the cliffs above a roaring river. But it didn't feel like safety. Not anymore. That same night the drone came. Silent. Hovering. Lena saw it first, blinking above the trees. She grabbed a rock and hurled it. The drone dipped but didn't fall. Then Bramo leapt. Higher than he had in weeks. He caught the machine mid-air and crushed it between his palms. The light died. But it was too late. They had been seen. The next morning, Lena woke to the sound of helicopters in the distance. Blows. Not above the village. But here. In the forest. She crouched beside Bramo, her voice tight. "We need to go now. Not deeper. Away." But he didn't move. Instead he pointed to the trees above. And slowly climbed. Lena followed. They went as high as the branches would allow, up into the mist, where the ground below looked like water. And then they waited. 4 hours. No one came. But the sound didn't stop. Engines. Feet. Orders barked into radios. She saw figures below. Humans. With more machines. More nets. Lena pressed her forehead to Bramo's arm. "This is my fault," she whispered. "They came for me." But Bramo shook his head. He took her hand, gently pressing her palm to his chest. Then to hers. Then pointed to the forest. "We belong here." Lena swallowed her tears. "I won't let them take you again." She pulled out the knife she kept in her belt. Small but sharp. Bramo looked at her. She wasn't threatening him. She was ready to fight. That night rain fell hard. Thunder cracked the sky in two. The invaders didn't retreat. They moved through the storm like ghosts in plastic suits, their eyes covered by glass, their hands ready to capture. But Lena was ready too. She had spent her life learning how to survive. She knew every route that could trip a man, every slippery rock that led to a fall, every tree with thorns sharp enough to tear through gloves. She made traps, set distractions, whistled like forest birds to confuse them. And Bramo, he didn't hide anymore. He led them in circles, led them away from her, until he couldn't. One of the men spotted her. "Girl, don't move." Ran. down the cliffs, through the fog, toward the edge of the waterfall. She heard feet behind her. Then she slipped. Her body fell hard on the mud, sliding toward the river. Strong arms grabbed her. Not human. Bramo. He lifted her in one motion and ran. But the dart came fast. Struck him in the leg. He stumbled, fell to one knee. Lena screamed. No! She grabbed the dart and pulled it out. He roared louder than ever before. The sound echoed through the valley. And for the first time the forest answered. Birds rose from the trees. Monkeys shrieked. Wolves howled. And the invaders froze. Bramo stood tall again. Rain pouring off his fur. Lena. She stood at his side. Face to face with the men who tried to cage her family. I am not leaving, she said, her voice steady. You'll have to go through me. No one moved. The storm thundered louder. The animals drew closer. And the forest, the very ground beneath them, seemed to breathe. The rain did not stop. It came in sheets, thick and heavy, falling like judgment from the sky. Lightning ripped across the black clouds, lighting up the faces of the men in armor, casting long, shaking shadows over the muddy ground. Lena stood at the center of it all, soaked to the bone, trembling from cold and exhaustion, but unmoving. Beside her, Bramo towered once more. His breathing was sharp. His eyes burned with fire, not of rage, but of unshaken resolve. The dart that had struck his leg had failed to bring him down. Not this time. Not here. Before them stood the intruders. 10, maybe more. All dressed the same, their eyes hidden behind plastic, their weapons steady in their hands. Their leader, a man with a silver badge and a voice that had commanded silence in meetings and chaos on missions, took a step forward. You don't understand what that creature is, he said, voice raised over the storm. It's dangerous. It doesn't belong out here. Lena stepped forward too. No, you don't belong here. Her voice cracked like thunder. He saved me when no one else would. He gave me shelter when the world threw me away. You call him a creature. Then you haven't looked in a mirror lately. The man hesitated, his eyes narrowing behind his visor. This is not about you. It's about control. And there it was. The truth spoken without shame. Control. Lena felt the forest around her shift. The wind bent the branches like bows pulled tight. Leaves scattered in every direction. The wolves that had gathered in the shadows were no longer hiding. Owls stared down from the trees. Even the earth itself felt alive, as if waiting for a signal to rise. You came here thinking you could take whatever you wanted, she said. But this place, it remembers, protects, and you've pushed it too far. Bramo let out a low growl, one that shook the mist around him. The lead soldier raised his weapon. Stand down, he ordered. But his voice trembled. And Lena saw it. For the first time he was afraid. It happened fast. A howl from the north. A rush of wings from the south. From the canopy above, a swarm of bats broke into the air, diving toward the lights with shrieks sharp as razors. Men stumbled, covered their heads. One dropped his gun. Another fell into the mud. Then came the monkeys. Leaping from branch to branch, they screeched and threw stones, sharp sticks, anything they could grasp. One of them landed on a soldier's back, clawing at the straps of his gear. The soldier screamed and ran blindly into the thicket. The invaders had come with cages. But the forest had come with fury. Lena crouched beside Bramo as chaos erupted around them. She grabbed a broken branch and held it tight. She didn't need to fight. The forest was doing it for her. Bramo stood tall in the storm. Lightning lit up his massive frame again and again, each flash making him look more like a guardian carved by the gods than any living creature. He raised both arms and let out a roar so deep, it echoed across the valley, bounced off cliffs and silenced every voice. The soldiers stopped. The animals stopped. Even the wind paused. Then the oldest of the wolves stepped forward. Not toward the soldiers. Toward Bramo. It bowed its head and howled. Signal. The fight was over. And the forest had won. By morning the men were gone. Some fled into the trees. Others abandoned their gear and crawled back the way they came. Not all survived the escape. The ones who remained were found by villagers days later, shivering and muttering about ghosts in the mist, creatures that walked with thunder, and a girl with fire in her eyes. The government made no statement. The media reported a rare storm that caused the expedition to fail. But some people whispered the truth. That the forbidden forest had awoken. That it had chosen a guardian. Lena sat beside Bramo in the clearing once again. The sacred stone was cracked now, from the weight of battle, or maybe from the truth finally breaking free. Bramo's wounds had healed, slowly. And Lena, though tired, felt something inside her settle. Not peace, but purpose. "I'm staying here," she said aloud. Bramo looked at her, then nodded once. "You saved me," she added. "So now I'll protect what you protected." She stood, looked at the trees, the sky, the land that had once swallowed her in sadness. Now it held her like a mother. In the years that followed, many things changed. Villagers who had once feared the forest began to bring offerings to its edge. Fruit, flowers, even whispered prayers. Children told stories of the girl raised by a giant ape. Some laughed, but others believed. Deep in the forest, Lena built a new shelter, half stone, half wood. Not hidden, not afraid. And every morning, she walked among the trees with Bramo at her side. Their story was never written in books. But the forest remembered. Every leaf, every howl, every drop of rain that fell on the night the world learned. Some things are not meant to be caged. Some love is bigger than blood. And some families are chosen. Dear listeners, from this deeply emotional story, we learn that true love and care do not always come from those related by blood. Sometimes, the purest form of protection and affection comes from the most unexpected beings. Like Bramo, the giant ape. Lena represents so many children who feel abandoned, mistreated, or seen as unworthy. But from that pain and rejection, she found the true meaning of family. The forest, once feared, became her place of growth and healing. And the creature that others called a monster became her guardian, her home, her father. This story reminds us not to judge by appearances. Something that seems frightening on the outside can hold immense gentleness and kindness within. And someone who appears weak, like Lena, can become a symbol of bravery, standing up to cruelty, greed, and injustice with unwavering strength. It also teaches us to respect nature. The natural world is not ours to conquer. It has guardians of its own, and when humans cross the line, nature will rise to defend itself. This story is a work of fiction, crafted to feel real, so it may inspire, motivate, and offer lessons for our lives. May we learn to be kinder, more courageous, and never forget that family can be found in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We'd love to see how far our stories have reached. See you in the next tale.